Well, hi everybody, Father Alex here. Welcome to another episode of the Godcast. I am the vicar of St Matthew's Church in Burnley. I'm the host of the Godcast. I'm also the author of Our Daily Bread from Argos to the Altar, a Priest Story, which is available in all good bookshops. My guest today on the Godcast is Aman Bhogal. Aman is an activist for the Conservative Party. He is also a political commentator. He's found on numerous political shows, news shows. He is also the founder member of the Global Britain Centre. So we're going to be learning a little bit about him and about his beliefs and his political views at this current time. So I do hope you enjoy this interview now with Aman Bhogal. Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast today is Aman Bhogal. Aman, it's fabulous to get you on. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Alex. And it's really good to be on the Godcast. I think you do a fantastic job in bringing so many voices to your listeners and viewers.
That's very kind, Aman. Now, people who aren't who are listening on the podcast will be different to those who are watching on YouTube. We've got a fabulous backdrop here, Aman. We've got two fabulous Union Jack flags. Why are you so committed to those as your backdrop there?
Well, look, I think I came to England as an 8-year-old boy, speaking 2 words of English on day one of school. I made this great nation my home, and it's made me one of our own. And I think our flag is a synonym for freedom, for liberty, for independence. And you know what? It gives us all a sense of belonging in the nation that we call home. And I think it's incredibly important that we reclaim it and make flying the flag patriotic once again.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I said to you off camera how powerful that flag was as a boy growing up. It was in all the Olympic Games. It was kind of a real th sense of focus. Some people now, Amon, would actually say that's not my flag because it's got it's got the countries of the British Isles, and people, with the rise of the Scottish Independence Party, for example, would say, well, that's not my flag.
Well, on the contrary, I think Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, England are all an integral part of the Union of the United Kingdom. In fact, when I stood for Parliament in Northern Ireland, stood there as someone who is proud to be British United within the United Kingdom, right? And a lot of people seem to fail to understand that this flag belongs not just to England, not just to Scotland, but all the four nations. But even more so than that, it's what this flag stands for today. Look, our country is a civilizational nation, and there are very few countries around the world who are not mere lines on a map. And that's why I think the fact that we have got a civilizational nation that has achieved so much, that has given the world so much, and you know what? Why shouldn't we be proud of Britain?
Yeah, it's nice to hear somebody speak with the sense of pride in patriotism. You are a chap who grew up in Birmingham, Amman, and from the outside looking in, it seems like that part of our nation is in a bit of turmoil now. I've just been reading about rat-infested streets and rubbish on the pavements. What's your take? What's going on there?
Well, actually, I must put a correction there. I grew up in Bexley, not Birmingham, here in southeast London. And I grew up on a council estate in southeast London. Growing up, we had tough times, but there was a sense of camaraderie and community at the same time. But yes, the country as a whole has changed rapidly over the last 25 years. We see the scenes in Birmingham, rats as big as cats infesting the streets, basic good governance failing, basic civic governance failing. And I think it really sums up of the failings that have been sort of foisted upon the general population, be it we are paying more for less services and council tax. We are led in so many ways by leaders who are incompetent and who should never have been anywhere near the levers of power. And I often think as to, well, the country that gifted the world, common law and democracy and the rule of law to so many places around the world, how is it that we have failed ourselves so badly? And I often think that, and I think, you know what, it's because of we are not having enough people engaging in the whole process of democracy, in the way the democratic system functions and works. If you look back at the 50s, for example, the Conservative Party had nearly 2.5 million members. And where are we today? 140,000 odd, maybe. And that's with a smaller population back then. But it gives you a sense of idea as to why people were more engaged, perhaps, in democracy in the 50s. And I think that was, again, it boils down to three things, I would argue. A sense of nation building post World War II. That's something my grandfather did when he first came to England in 1959. He was a carpenter. He helped rebuild South London. But also, I also blame our humongous social welfare state. When you don't have to, as is evident with 9.4 million economically inactive people of working age in the country, you don't really have the aspiration to get up to and really help build the country around you, no matter what job you might end up doing. Well, then, are you really going to be interested in taking part in democracy, in politics, in helping shape the policies that affect your life and the community around you? So I think these three things have a real impact on the failure we see in so many lack of good governance around us. So if you don't get involved, you don't play a part, then I think this is what we end up with.
I think that's, I mean, I'm immediately going to divert off the questions that I've written down, Aman, because there's some interesting stuff in there. You know, I live and work in Burnley, which is, it's a fabulous place. I love living and working here. I've grown up here, spent most of my life here, but it does have some significant problems. You know, I work very close to two of the most deprived estates in the country here, where some of those people that you perhaps described, those are people who aren't working, live and reside, who would be disengaged with many things, politics being one of them, work being another one of them. And for many of them, it is an issue of poverty, of what I describe as a poverty of aspiration. It's not necessarily about money. It's just kind of they feel perhaps they've been left behind and nobody's kind of cared about them. And I've always known that in Burnley. It's always been the case, regardless of the government or the local politician. I wonder where you think how we redress that. You know, you can't just say you've got to go to work. You've got to give them a purpose and a value in that. Where do you think the starting place is?
Look, I think I'm a big believer that, look, first of all, the only way to run a country is free democracy, but you've got to give people something, you've got to enthuse them with ideas, with vision and with leadership. And that's what has been missing for so long in our country. I think I first really properly got involved in the 2010 general election. And David Cameron had this, vision of big society, which sometimes people thought, well, what does it actually mean, right? You know, what does big society mean? I mean, but he would have this vision of from the cradle to the grave, that, you know, government should not be there to direct how you run your life, but to sort of be a gentle hand of assistance in the background to make sure that you have the means necessary to help yourself in terms of aspiration. Now, in today's day and age, when we have got those 9.4 million people economically, they are unenthused. It's the same thing with democracy. Until we had the EU referendum, I was campaigning for Vote Leave, knocking on doors around the country. And one of the things I saw was there was this big cohort of people who were very interested in the country, in the direction it was heading in, and lack of democratic accountability we had under the EU, but they had never voted in an election for the past 30 years. And often I would speak to such people and they would say, well, we've had nothing to vote for. And again, when that referendum came around, you saw this good solid chunk of 10% of the electorate who had never voted for anything else in 30 years suddenly come out and tip the balance in favor for Leave. And the reason they did that, because they had something to vote for. So I think we have to have far better candidate selection in all the major parties. We have to deliver the MPs that people deserve. look at the green benches today, and people who are engaged in politics, monitoring and observing it like I am, we'd be hard pressed to name so many of these people. Who are they? What have they achieved in life? The biggest trajectory we've seen, certainly on the Labour side, is you go to university, from there you become a bag carrier for a shadow minister or a minister or an MP, and from there you parachuted into a safe seat and become an MP and then minister. And on the Conservative side, we've seen an issue with, well, certainly under the previous administration, under David Cameron, for example, we had these things called open primaries. We started people we had a postman who became an MP, we had a nurse who became an MP, we had a fireman who became an MP. And that's what we have to be doing. People who are not engaged in politics because they want to make it a career, but they have made careers outside of politics and, have lived their lives building it themselves and can then come and enthuse. So it has to be a team game, but that's the crux of it. Who's going to fix candidate selection? That's what it boils down to. Often I've seen, for example, knocking on doors in local elections in previous times, wards of great poverty and deprivation, and you get a turnout of around 20% on a good day. Now, 20% of the population in that ward is enthused enough to come out and vote. And that's where another part of the big part of this problem is, that if we are not able to enthuse people to come out, what they're going to vote for.
Yeah, I mean, Iman, I'm gonna pin you down here because I'm not a person who aligns with any political party. I'm a campaigner for social injustice, and the question I suppose I've got for you is, do you think the Conservative is genuinely a party for all people? And I'll just, before you answer, I'll just give you an example of where I have a real disconnect here. Is so in Burnley before the last election, Burnley was awarded £10 million from the Levelling Up agenda. And that £10 million was spent on the regeneration of, effectively, from our bus station to our football ground. The pavement was done, roundabouts were dug up, and it looks absolutely incredible. But meanwhile, in my context, in my parish, I'm seeing a huge rise in crime. I'm seeing a rise in social, a collapse in social aspiration. I'm seeing people falling into debt. I'm seeing people becoming addicted. I've been campaigning very hard recently about ketamine addiction in our area. So I think it's a legitimate question. I'd be really interested to know what your response would be.
Well, look, I've always argued that most people who come into public life, into politics, into elected office, both sides of the equation, whether it be on the Conservative side or the left socialist side, generally, I would hope to believe are coming in to do the right thing in terms of looking after the weakest in society, looking after those who need the most help, but also trying to bring in opportunity for those who can create and generate the wealth that will level up everyone else. But where I do disagree with the other side is, well, how do we get there? So my core belief is that as a Conservative, what I believe in is that, look, it's how you get a roof on every head, you get a job for every hand, and you get food on every table. Now, the other side believe that we should be taking it from those who have the most and giving it away to everyone else. And you know what? I think that is what kills aspiration, because you're not enthusing people to level up themselves and level up their communities around them. Now, leveling up was fantastic when Boris announced it. I campaigned for it with Boris. It was supposed to level up certainly huge swathes of areas of deprivation in the north, especially. The Northern Powerhouse has been a project trying to do exactly that. But again, you can only do so when you create opportunities for people to do stuff, to generate wealth themselves. Now, you can only do that if they have a safe environment to live and work in, if they have if they have that safe environment for investment to come in, where a government is saying, well, look, these are people, we're going to skill them up, we're going to level up their skills, and you can employ them. Now, a lot of that hasn't happened over the last 25 years. And you know what? I put my hand up and say, well, yes, it's not only been Labour who've been in charge under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, it's also been the Conservatives who have been in charge. And sometimes I don't think enough has been done to level up certainly huge swathes of the North. And I think that's what Boris saw as well. And that's why the whole levelling up agenda to build on getting Brexit done was put forth. Now, having said all that, again, what does it boil down to? You need good governance, you need zero tolerance when it comes to fighting crime, and you need to make sure that the social welfare net is there to help those most in need. Not everyone, but those most in need. And I think those three things the country had generally failed on. If you look at, as you were saying, you were dealing with this catamine situation in your parish. Now, this is a very recent phenomena in a few past years that we've seen in America, we've seen in other parts of the world, certainly in the West. Now, who are all these criminal gangs that are bringing in catamine and selling it on our streets, certainly in affecting the most areas of greatest deprivation? Why isn't enough being done to deal with it? Now, I would argue that what we're seeing in the US right now under President Trump, he's cracking down very hard. You've got this new director of the FBI, Kash Patel, first day, first show, first blockbuster. He's gone after the big gangs. They're deporting them all to is it El Salvador, and they're sorting out the problem very, very quickly. Now that will allow ordinary, normal communities to not have to live in fear that their child is going to be accosted by a drug dealer peddling them with life-threatening drugs, that the child is not going to get into a gang and then having to carry a knife to defend themselves, get into a vicious circle of youth violence. Now, all that boils down to good governance, and that's what we've been missing. And again, it boils further down to the MPs and ministers that we end up getting. And that boils down to candidate selection. I keep on repeating that, but that's literally what it boils down to. The average voter at the ballot box, if they're conservative-minded, Labour-minded, or dare I say even reform-minded, will give a cross in that box, not knowing a great deal about the actual individual. They will trust that the party they align with most have done the right thing in selecting the best possible candidate for the local area. And again, that's where biggest of our failures are. If you look at the number of housing secretaries we had in the previous, even 25 years, there was a churn literally every 13 months. Is that really good enough to have a coherent long-term policy when housing is such a huge issue for so many people? Same thing with education. Same thing with the home secretaries, right? We've had home secretaries, yet the democracy has been held back by the bureaucracy. How is it that we can't deal with illegal migration coming into the country? So these are all issues, I would argue, that boil down to good governance that isn't being given because, let's be honest, we haven't had the best of the possible people getting to the top.
I can just hear the opposition shouting at me saying, well, tell him it was his party that was in power for the last,
Well, as I say, 14 years of Conservative government, and then nearly the same before that of New Labour. And we are back to square one. We've got this New Labour 2.0. Now, yesterday, I heard the Chief Secretary to the Treasury being asked about, well, what are you going to do about all these issues with tariffs coming in from the US? And his response was as expected. He said, well, we've been working on our trade policy for the last few months, and we'll have more to add over the next year. Right. This is a party that has had 14 years in opposition. Surely the opposition's job is to be ready as a government, as an alternative government. So again, it highlights the point I'm trying to make here, that we are not attracting the best and the brightest into politics. That's not to say that we don't have the best and the brightest. Some of the best run businesses in the world are run by British people. Some of the best outcomes in education are delivered by British teachers, and furthermore. But where are all these people not wanting to come into Westminster and sort out the mess? And again, that's the crux of the problem.
Yeah, I think you you've got so many things that have got me thinking now, Aman. I think I totally agree with you. I think the standard of the politician leaves a lot to be desired.
It
And
does.
and Jeffrey Archer came on the podcast, and he was saying, there was a big debate recent or in the last year or two about the salary for a member of parliament, and his argument was you need to pay more if you want the very best. You've got to pay more because these people will actually the very best are getting paid twice these sums of money and more and more and more, and they're running businesses, and so I think that's interesting.
Well, that may be so. Although I think that would, if we have to end up paying more to attract the best and brightest, I think that's a real indictment of what we started off the podcast with is patriotism. Surely that if you are, no matter what you're earning, it might be 10 times more than what you might make as an MP. Surely it's the national interest that you feel such a part of the country that you want to give something back, and that again sort of highlights where are the people that are doing it for the national interest and not just for the money. So again, I think we are not attracting. It's a very vicious circle, I would say, where you can only run a nation state if you actively promote a belief in that nation state. So if we keep on having a public sector, a sort of media sector that keeps deriding anything that is even remotely proud, anyone who's really remotely to be proud to be British, proud to fly the flag, for example, and all we get is this mishmash of vokery shoved down our throats day in, day out, then obviously, the next generation of Britons are going to think, well, who really am I? So it's a vicious circle.
You said a few minutes ago, the Labour Party with 14 years to prepare, surely they'd be, hit the ground running kind of thing.
Mm.
But then on the flip side, we've got Kemi Badenoch now, who hasn't revealed anything about policy, almost like I'll work it out as I go along. Maybe that's an unfair criticism, but that's maybe how it's perceived. Meanwhile, Mr. Farage is making hay while the sun shines and is lapping it up, isn't he? And he's almost celebrating the next victory, which seems imminent, unless the Conservatives can kind of step up and ramp up whatever it is they are going to say they stand for. What's your take on all that?
Well, look, I think the country had voted in 4 successive elections. I think 2 of those elections we probably shouldn't have had because they were so unnecessary in terms of getting things done and giving. They were I think ultimately they hindered delivering Brexit. They hindered delivering good governance. But I agree with you. Look, the public is really wanting very ordinary, sensible, basic, common sense conservative ideals and ideas to deliver for them. They voted 4 elections for one particular thing: to reduce mass migration, for basic good governance when it comes to dealing with the nation's finances, and for basic good governance when it comes to delivering public services. Now, that's what people voted for 4 different elections, and dare I say, even in many ways within the referendum. But ultimately, I think a lot of people got sick and tired of not getting what they voted for. And if you look at the majority that Starmer got, less people voted for him than did for Jeremy Corbyn in the previous election. Yet he got a far bigger majority in terms of seats, because how many people who voted Conservative in the past stayed at home or went and voted for reform? Now, if you break down the numbers, I would argue that Britain is inherently a conservative country, because this is a country that is heaped in tradition. It has a civilization that is, more than 1,000 years old. It has so much that is going for it in terms of the basics, right? The vast majority of the world is still trying to figure out what they stand for as a country, what they believe in, whether they have a written constitution in terms of what it means and what liberty means. We've got all that worked out. We're still the 5th biggest economy in the world. We have such a wonderful population that, if enthused correctly, I think can go and make that the 4th biggest economy in the world. And with Brexit under our belt, I think, again, it'll be far easier for us to do these trade deals, certainly with the US, than it might have been prior. So I think the people know what they want. It's for the politicians to work out how they can deliver it. And I would argue that so far we've seen from Labour is not what people want. I think this government has become the most unpopular government in the fastest possible time in what it has delivered, whether it's on free speech, whether it's on not being able to tackle migration, whether it's not being able to deal with stewarding the economy properly. So people know what they want. It's the politicians that have to work out how to deliver it.
And what about you, Aman? You are a man of integrity. Are you a conservative whatever? Or do you see, if the Conservative Party don't bring forward the policies that you want to hear, would you ever consider joining the Reform Party?
Look, I joined the Conservative Party when I was still at school. And I joined it for one very simple reason, among a plethora of other reasons that people might enthuse themselves with the Conservatives. My grandfather would always tell me that, son, the only way into prosperity is through a good education. And I believe that the best education that you can ever receive is a grammar school education. And it's the Conservative Party who will always back you to have that. And that's what ended up happening. I went to a boys-only grammar school with an engineering engineering speciality, and that's why I joined the Conservative Party. Now, that's where I joined the Conservative Party. Over the years, it's had different hues of that conservatism, and I think look at where the Conservative Party was under the debacle that was Theresa May, and everything had been written off. And within 6 months, Boris had delivered, I think, a stonking majority of 80. So things can change. And
Aman, do you know what? I'm just going to say to you that, what you said about grammar school. Yeah, I want kids to have the best education. 58% of the kids in my school are on free school meals. How are they going to get to grammar school, Aman?
As was I when I was growing up. I was on free school meals. I went to a grammar school. It had no bearing on it at all. I think it boils down to good old-fashioned strong families create strong communities. Strong communities create a strong country. And some of that comes down to faith, I would argue. Some of that comes down to basic traditional family values. Why is it that we in the UK now have a declining domestic indigenous population? Why have we got higher divorce rates and single parent families? These are all things that are negatively contributing to the state that our country is in. So I would argue that whether you're on free school meals, come from a family of deprivation or not, I think, in fact, that should enable you even more to be able to go into a grammar school, because you're doing it for aspiration.
Okay, well, thanks for your view. There's a couple more questions I need to ask you. You alluded to at the beginning was I got a sense that you were supporting Trump in his policies. As the gentleman who founded the Global Britain Centre, and we see these tariffs. I've just been reading about Hong Kong and Taiwan. Their economies fallen through the floor this morning. Do you think this is going to be he's going to stick with this? Do you think he needs to change course? Is it a case of tough medicine to get what is required?
I agree with the latter point. I think it is tough medicine to finally, for Trump to put America first, put the American national interest first, to bring back prosperity to the average man and woman who's a worker in middle America. But ultimately, look, this is about trying to rebalance the American trade books. It surely isn't right that America has been literally the piggy bank for most economies in East Asia, exporting tons and tons of stuff that America has stopped making themselves. It shouldn't be that we export all our high-paid, high-skilled jobs and import low-skilled, low-paid, cheap foreign labor that further undermines our domestic working class workers and people. But look at what's already happening with the whole tariff stuff from Trump. We've seen one of the biggest exporters to the US, Vietnam, to which a lot of American companies had shifted their production from China post-pandemic. It's already come to the negotiating table to try and arrange a free trade agreement with the US. And this is what it boils down. This is what it's about. This is all designed to give the US leverage, because otherwise, if a country is already exporting to the US and is hardly importing anything back in any case, what incentive do they have to have a trade agreement? So this is a very serious game of geopolitics. Vietnam is coming on board. This is about reorientating the global economy away from being reliant solely on the Chinese, and that can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I could talk to you for ages, Aman, because you keep provoking me with your. So, you know, I mean, I'm from Burnley, which is a place of rich industrial heritage. Of,
Indeed,
you know, and and as I've lived here pretty much all my life, I've seen that manufacturing industry collapse.
indeed, we have. I mean, look,
And just to say, you know, and I never thought British Steel would be on the verge of closing such a
yes,
huge. It's a travesty, isn't it?
it is. It is beyond a travesty. It's a real threat to our national security, our national heritage, our national capacity. I mean, look, by profession, I'm a foundry man. I learned my trade on a foundry, on a furnace, melting iron and steel, casting ductile iron, and all the rest of it. And I think, look, again, we have the world's most expensive electric. How are we supposed to create any manufacturing jobs when that is the case? This present government is refusing to exploit our own natural resources that are under our own land. They're filling up. They've already filled up the fracking wells with concrete. At the same time, they're wanting to import gas and oil and lithium batteries from the Chinese. And again, what about the workers in the DRC and in Africa who are being exploited by the Chinese communists, digging up all this lithium? So again, it boils down to lack of good governance. We should never have had a situation where British Steel ended up originally being bought by Tata. They tried to make it work. I think most recently went to the Chinese, and of course it was never in their interest to keep on enabling domestic British steel production. And again, this is a lot similar to what was happening in the US. Domestic steel production in the US had collapsed. I think one single Chinese shipbuilding yard was building more ships in a year than the whole of America put together. That's how bad it had got. Now, already we're seeing the Hyundai Steel from South Korea. It's announced that it's opening a new steel mill in Wisconsin. And again, that can only be a good thing in terms of national security when it comes to certainly for the American national interest. I mean, let's not forget, we do live in a very dangerous world. And if we don't have the capacity to make our own steel, then surely the country who gave modern steelmaking practice to the rest of the world is a real indictment of where our good governance has gone.
Yeah, absolutely. Aman, we've covered a lot of ground in half an hour.
Sure.
One thing I haven't asked and I want to ask is, as you're a man of faith, I'd like to ask how that plays into your thinking and how important that is to you when when you're doing public speaking or you're on the telly or you're just speaking into the political debate. Just share a bit of that with us if you would.
Sure. Look, as a Sikh, I'm a man of dharma. Dharma means the natural order of things, of how God intends to see and do good for everyone, and that is the basic philosophy. Is that as a Sikh, I see the well-being of the whole world as an integral part of who I am. And that dharma drives a lot of my political thinking. And I boil that dharmic thinking down into a very simple thing: that how do we do what is right, first of all, to do the right thing, and also, furthermore, to do what is right for the last man and woman in the queue, because those are the ones that we should always be working for. And that's literally what it is, dharma.
Yeah. Thank you, Man. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you. I could talk to you a lot longer, but you will know that podcasts shouldn't go on too long because people switch off. But thank you so much. I hope people have enjoyed watching and listening to this conversation. There are hundreds of podcasts now, lots of politicians, very famous political commentators. There are musicians, there are sports people and
Of course.
theologians. But for now, Aman, thank you so much for coming on the Godcast.
Thank you for taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Very
you,
good,
Aman.
very good. And not at all. And may I say, Alex,
Sorry, just stop that.